Welcome again. In this part we're going to dive headfirst into components that are purely logical, and we will learn about the two types of signals in this system. So far, we've mostly discussed about sockets that send one signal at a time. However, sometimes we would like a signal to be sending out repeatedly, such as when connecting to a disabled socket, which is a continuous state that needs to be upheld and not a singular event. For that, some objects have a toggle to make them send a constant signal, and some logic nodes like toggle send out a constant signal by default. You can see how the constant trigger box will spawn many junk dogs, and it will tick repeatedly when counting back. The game over node finishes the game by a loss or a win. Adding a game over node to your level will override the default win condition of killing all the enemies. You can add a custom lose reason to each individual game over node. It also has the special function of pausing the timer if your score type is time. So long as the pause socket gets a constant signal, the timer won't run. To trigger events based on time or count, you have the timer, counter, and start nodes. The timer gets an input, then waits a set amount of time and releases an output to all of its connections. You can connect the timer to another timer and do something in between, or connect the timer to itself to have the same action repeated at the same intervals. Counters work by receiving inputs that -1 or +1 them. Each time such an input is received, the counter will send an output based on the number that it is currently on. You can also reset the counter to its original number. If you want to do something 5 times and then do something different, set the counter to 5 and connect the trigger to the thing that you want to happen to the positive of the counter. Reduce the counter by 1 for every time it happened, and connect 0 to the new thing that you want to happen. A powerful combination is to chain counters by connecting a negative to the next one's minus. This has the same functionality as connecting timers to one another, but with much more control. The start node is the simplest of them all. It just sends one signal when the level begins. Random and sequence nodes are the middleman that decides where the signal should go. Every time the random node receives an input, it will randomly choose only one of its outputs to send a signal to. It can be used to randomize what spawns from a wave, or randomize a location if you use multiple entities at different locations. The sequence node has multiple outputs, and it goes through them in order every time it receives an input. It loops back to the first output after it went through all the rest. If you want to extend the sequence beyond 5 outputs, then you can connect another sequence node into its more socket that will appear once you reach the max. When dead sends a signal when entities die under different configurations. You can set the node to count friendlies, enemies, or both. When set to any one kill will send one signal. When set to all, it will only send the signal when all entities have died. The check interval is the amount in seconds from the last enemy death to the point where the game actually checks if all enemies are dead. Set this higher if you know there can be other spawns in this interval. I've also been using the score node to demonstrate. It has a minus and plus socket, just like the counter. When you have a score node in the arena, it will connect to the custom score from the settings menu, show up on the scoreboards, and appear on the leaderboards.
For this level, I'll be doing some target practice. I have a wall separating me and the enemies, and a gate that spawns friendly bots that I can throw. I have 1 minute to hit the most shots. Everything is spawned in this level by having a timer that is connected to itself. I have a series of counters connected to one another that count down whenever an enemy is dead, and when a counter reaches 0 it will start a new timer that will spawn a new type of enemy wave. And each enemy wave has their speed stats set higher, so they're harder to hit. Finally, we have our score connected to any dead. When using logic this way, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with enemies, so it's important to be mindful of how many enemies you will have at any given moment, so you don't get this message that says that you basically crush the system.